But before I go on, I must ask a question, because this is a very interesting question for me, and I've never asked this in Singapore. How many of you would say that Singapore is a developed country? Raise your hand. How many of you say that Singapore is a developing country? Oh, very good. Interesting. 50-50. I come from a developed country. I come from Sweden. I've been living there for 35 years. And then, like I said, 4 years ago, I moved to a developing country. I moved to China. I was blown away by that. That changed the view of my life, especially as a creativity author. And I suddenly realized, after only a few months living in China, I realized that, yes, we in the developed world have huge advantages. But when it comes to creativity, people in developing countries actually have advantages that we don't have. And I started studying them. And that's what I've been doing on all these trips, interviewing all these people. And I don't have time to share all the advantages now. I'd like to share a few advantages that people living in developing countries have when it comes to thriving in this changing environment that we will go into the next 10 to 15 years. So let's start at looking at the first one. The first one, of course, like I said about idea perception, if you are going to be able to thrive on change, first of all, you need to see it. And if you're living in a developing country, you see change better than if you're living in a developed country. And to prove this, or to exemplify this, I'm going to use two people. One is a 30-year-old woman from Sweden, which is a developed country. One is a 30-year-old woman from Beijing, which is a developing country. This is Stockholm 30 years ago. This is where I grew up. This is Beijing. Now, of course, the hutongs are still there. But so are these other buildings, and that's where I lived when I was Singapore 100 years ago, 50. This is Stockholm 30 years ago. This is Beijing 30 years ago. Now, this is when these two women were born. Now, let's compare how their environment has changed, how their world has changed in the last 30 years. Let's start with Beijing. From this to this, I was living in Beijing, which means that the Chinese woman has seen the world change rapidly. Now, let's go back and compare that to the 30-year-old woman from Stockholm. This is Stockholm 30 years ago. This is Stockholm today. And to be totally fair, we have one new building, right? Now ask yourself, who will see change most easily? The woman who is living in it, or the one who's reading newspapers about it? Obviously. Think about nature. If an animal is living in an environment that doesn't change, the animal will not change. A crocodile can look the same for 80 million years. An eel has been looking the same for 100 million years. We don't change unless we have to. But if you're living in an environment that is constantly changing, the animal will also constantly change or die. Sweden right now is a crocodile. Or if you prefer it, an eel, both going extinct. So the first advantage you have living in a developing country is that you see the change. The second advantage is that you have knowledge. Remember the definition of a creativity. You take knowledge and information, you combine it in a new way. So you need knowledge to be able to be creative. Now, if you live in a developing country, you have more knowledge than if you live in a developed country. Not less. Most people say less, that people in developed world has a knowledge advantage. No. Bullshit, okay? Developing countries have a knowledge advantage. So let's look at that. Let's go back to the 30-year-old woman from Beijing. Of course, she knows everything about China. She knows Chinese characters. She knows Chinese culture. She knows Chinese pop stars and movie stars and latest trends and brands and everything else that they need to know about China. But, of course, during the last 20 years, she has also imported a lot of knowledge about the West. She has an Apple computer. She listens to ABBA. She knows that Michael Jackson died. She knows Nike. She knows Barack Obama. She knows about the West, which means that her world looks like this. Now, if creativity is taking knowledge from different places and combining it, what does it mean if you can take knowledge from two cultures and then combine? This is the world of a developing country. This is the world of an American. The Chinese woman knows that Michael Jackson dies. The American woman cannot name a single Asian singer, period. Living or dead. And this is what this means. This is the medals from the Beijing Olympics last year, obviously done by a Chinese, which means that the medal has gold, silver, and bronze, because that's a Western concept. We invented that. The Greeks invented that. And he knows that. So when he's going to do an Olympic medal, he does gold, silver, and bronze, as you're supposed to. But since he also is Chinese, he knows that if you're going to do jewelry in China, you use jade. So there's white jade in the gold medal, yellow jade in the silver medal, and green jade in the bronze medal. And for the first time in Olympic history, we have a medal that is beautiful in the East and in the West, because he knew both parts. How many Swedish designers could have done this without Googling first? And that's the key thing, because that's the difference between knowledge and information. Of course, we can all Google it, but we don't. We, the developed world, we just don't Google you. When I came to Singapore, I live in Singapore now. I moved, after living in Beijing, I traveled around the world, and last year I moved to Singapore. When I came to Singapore, July last year, the Chinese movie Red Cliff went up on the cinemas. Huge posters. Next to them, same weekend, the American movie Batman went up. Which means that a 17-year-old Singaporean will go and watch Red Cliff on Friday night and Batman on Saturday night. I was just recently home in Sweden. And I did a speech, 300 people in the audience. I said, how many of you have been watching Batman? 80% raised their hand. I said, how many of you have been watching Red Cliff? Red what? One raised her hand. One. Chinese immigrant student, yeah. Exchange student. Now, of course, ask yourself, who has the potential to write the next Harry Potter or to be the next Dan Brown? Someone who puts in references to the Asian culture and to the Western culture, or someone who just puts in references to the Western culture? Of course, you still read Dan Brown because you understand Western culture, but wouldn't it be nicer if they also had some references to the Eastern culture? Who has the potential to make the next blockbuster movie? Someone who has been seeing Chinese movies and American movies, or someone who's just been seeing American movies? Who has the knowledge advantage? Regardless if it's making a movie, writing a novel, designing an airport, building a mobile phone, because now the largest market for any product that we do is in developing countries, and the West doesn't know shit about that market. Who has the knowledge advantage? And here's the third advantage. Let's go back to the second one. Just, of course, Singapore is that. Why did I move? Of all the countries I can live, why did I, as an author of creativity books, why did I move to Singapore? Because Singapore is the most international city in the world, obviously. So the potential here is greater to coming up with ideas that can be sold all over the world is nowhere better than here.